Hello coders, this is Chapa and welcome to another edition of Coding with Chapa. So, I had a request for showing how to return data from the select statement to use it as a, rather than just returning nothing, having the select statement actually return the data right here back to the main function or whatever function calls your select statement. And I thought that was pretty good. That was a good question. And also in there was how to then use some of that data to set them as a variable and maybe do something with it. So I thought rather than just doing this little demo that I did before in part 1, to expand upon it and maybe do something a little bit usable and write a little application, just a demonstration app. It's not really something that you would use in your code, but a good demo app that demonstrates how to return a variable in your function. What I really want to say is how to return a single object from your select function, and then how to actually use some of the data that is returned in that object from the database. So we're going to build a really simple password comparison app. Again, not practical in any sense of the word, just purely for demonstration purposes. As you can tell, we're not even working with a real physical database. We're actually just going to work in memory, and that's what memory is really good for, is for this kind of stuff, just testing, playing around, and just practicing your code. If we want to do this for real, we would definitely write a physical database where I have that line commented out, and in part 1 I went through that. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so I need to make some adjustments to this code, a lot of adjustments. The very first thing that we're going to do is in the select statement, right in here in this function, in the select function, we need to make some modifications to return the data that was selected from the database as a single object. And the data structure that we're going to use is a list. So I'm going to write some code and then I'll explain it. Okay, so I modified the code here, and what I did is, what's new is I added a list. So I declare and initialize a list here, and my list is just li for list, and in the same for loop that existed before, I commented out the print, and this time I added the list and I used the reserved keyword append, and I'm going to append the row, and then I'm going to return the list. So what was added was the list here, the append reserved keyword, and then returning the list. And that's what this is going to do. This little bit of code here, these 2 lines that I added, is the resultant from the select statement of the database is now going to be appended or added into the list, and then that data set is going to return in a single object from the select function, and it's going to be returned right here, return li. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is back when this is where this is called. So now up here where it says SQL_select, that list is going to be returned. So I need to make some modifications here in the main function in order to do something with it. So I'm going to write some code and then I'll explain. Okay, so in the main function I added several lines of code right here. Now this right here used to be only the SQL_select con, and it called that function, and then the data was printed out in the select statement. So what I did was I created a list right here and said, okay, here's my list. Now the list is going to be set or assigned to the values that are returned from the SQLite function. Remember, it's going to return a list down below, and now that list, whatever is returned, is going to be set to the list that I created up here. Okay, so that single object then becomes the list here. Next, just for testing purposes and for our example, I have a variable called PW, just a text, data type text, and it's going to be set to my testing value. So let's go ahead and say that too. This is just a testing value, and this could be anything. This could be an input statement where we're asking from the console, but again, for demonstration purposes, we're just going to hard code it. So we're looking for this exact password. Now here, I wanted to explain what each each value of each column is gonna look like. So in the array, I'm sorry, in the list li, we're going to use this this list here. So right here in the for loop, you can see for w in li. So every word that's in li is going to be 0, 1, 2, and 3, and these represent your columns. So object ID, first name, last name, and password. And we still need to modify that code too. We haven't done that yet. And so for every word in the list, we're looking to see if W3, which W3 is going to be the password, matches what we hard-coded right up in here. And if it does match, then we're going to print the first name and the last name of the user, and then we're going to break out of the loop. So that's what this right here does. I think this is a good example of saying, okay, once we have retrieved the data from the database, how do we use some of that data as a variable and then compare it to another variable? And this is an example of how to do that. All right, so these are the changes, and there was quite a few of them that I made in the main function. All of this, that entire block of code right there, is what was made in the main function, where previously it was just SQL_select and then parentheses con. But now it's all this. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is our table that we're going to create does not reflect the proper values. You can see here the insert is wrong. We need to use that. We're going to need to add passwords, and we're going to need to create the column for password. We're going to need to add another exclamation point, and up here in the select, we need to add some information here too. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll go ahead and explain everything. So let me do this real quick. Okay, so just remember this backward line. All that means is that we're continuing to the next line here. That's all that means. Okay, so we've added this to the create. We're going to create this table, and then it's going to have the column name, first name, last name, and password. They're all going to be of data type text, and so now our table in the database is going to have this value. So we need to do some changes down here to the inserts. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now, and I'm just going to make up some really silly passwords that aren't practical at all, but are good for demonstration purposes. So let's go ahead and say this. And I like to just be very lazy in my coding. Probably should have copied the comma. All right, so now let's see. Okay, so we created some passwords, but now these are the values that are going to be inserted into the table, and so we need to change our table too, which to reflect this. So let's go ahead and do that too. And we need to put that literal backslash in there for it to work. So let's go ahead and do that. And our new column is going to be called password, real simple. And in the values, all we need to do is say this is going to have another value. So let's go ahead and do that. And there we go. So now we have modified the insert. We're going to insert into first name, last name, password, these values, and it's going to be the values right here. So our insert is now completed. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is, let's see, we got the create. Create is done, the insert's done, and I think everything is done. So we're ready to test. Okay, so I went ahead and tested real quick, and this line right here was indented a little bit. So if you copy the code line by line, make sure that this line right here, the list, is that extra space is taken out. Otherwise, you'll get a runtime error. All right, so let's run this. and you can see Stanley was returned. And that makes sense because Stanley is the PWSL, and if you look above what we were looking for, we were saying if W3 and W3's password matches the comparator here, PW, and our variable is PWSL, then print it out and break. Okay, so let's try another one. What other passwords do we have here? Let's do PWSC. So right up in here, F5, enter, and there we go. The next one pops up. We have Sarah Chapa, and that makes sense. We close out. We can look down at our passwords, and here's Sarah Chapa. So this was a really simple example of how to return your, where is it, the select statement, how to return your data retrieved from a database into a single object, and we did that by creating a list, adding it to the list, and then returning the list. And then remember that that list then, where it was called from, right in here in the main function, is going to be, it needs to be set to something because now it's returning a list. So in the main function, I set this list that's returned right here to a new list. So a list, and then list is going to be assigned to the list that's returned in the select statement. And then I go ahead and do some testing. I say, okay, well, password was going to be password SC. We're testing for this value. And I went ahead and just put this little comment section here so that you could easily understand the three column names. Actually, there's 4 column names. But remember, in computers, almost everything starts with 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. So there's actually 4 columns. And then we have our little for loop to iterate through the list and compare the 3rd column, or 4th column, password here, with the password that we hard-coded. And then if there's a match using the comparator, print it out. Print out the first name and the last name, and then break the loop. And that was it. So it's really, really simple. Again, in the main function, this is the block of code that was added. In the select function, this is the block of code that was added. In the insert function, we added the new data that was going to be inserted, the password values, and we had to modify this. We had to add this table to our this column name to our table, and we had to add the extra question mark because there's now these 3 columns and these 3 values here. And that was it. The rest of this code I explained in part 1, and so I hope that was good. It was a demonstration on how to return your data from a database as a single object, and then how to use the data that's in that object to create some variables and do some comparisons. All right. I hope you liked it. If you have any more questions or issues, please let me know in the comments section. Have a great day.